Christ is risen. This is our fifth or sixth session of virtual Sunday school, I believe. I hope you're enjoying it so far. If you didn't get to watch the last few episodes, they're up on our YouTube page, which is linked to the email list, as well as on our Facebook page and the church website. So if you watched our lesson last week, we talked about a kind of unique person in the Bible, someone whose story is different than the ones we heard of before. That person was named Abraham. We heard of how Abraham, unlike many of the characters who came before him, was righteous. He trusted in God. He was faithful. And because he was faithful and trusted in God, he was given many blessings. He was given the promise that he would have a son, Isaac, and that him and all of his descendants, all of his children and his children's children and children's children's children would become the people of God. Abraham knew that all good gifts and blessings come from God, so when he was asked to give up these blessings, give up his son, he was, of course, still obedient. But God, of course, was not going to let Abraham give up his son. He just wanted to help Abraham to understand and remember that Abraham did not beget Isaac on his own, but that it was God who blessed Abraham with a son. And because Abraham learned this lesson, he was grateful and thankful to God for the rest of his life, and raised his son and his family to love God as well. And because Abraham had such a good marriage with his wife Sarah, and loved his wife and son so much, when Isaac grew up and was a young man, Abraham wanted to find a wife for him, so that Isaac could also have the blessings and happiness that Abraham did. And this is the story we're going to hear today, about Isaac and Isaac's son, Isaac's wife, Rebekah. If we've been reading the story so far of this book, Bible Stories for Children, so if you have it at home and you want to follow along, I'm on page 40. Isaac, Abraham's son, grew up to be a strong young man. But before he was married and had a family of his own, Sarah, his mother, died, and Isaac fell into a deep sadness. Abraham worried about his son. It was time for Isaac to get married, but Abraham did not want him to marry the daughter of a Canaanite. And so, after much thought, Abraham called his chief servant to him. "I have an important job for you. Promise me that you will do exactly as I say," Abraham said to the servant. "What is it, master?" the servant asked. "You must go to the land where I was born," said Abraham. "There you must find a wife for my son, who comes from the same family that I do, and you must bring her back to Canaan." "I will, my lord," the servant said. "But what if she will not come back to Canaan with me?" "God will help you," Abraham answered. The servant promised to do everything his master ordered. And so he loaded Abraham's treasure onto 10 camels and set out on his journey to Haran, Abraham's birthplace. When the servant arrived at Haran, he stopped near the well where the women of the town came to fetch water every evening. "Oh my God," he said, "help me. The women will soon come to draw water from the well. Let me know the wife you have chosen for Isaac in this way. When I ask a young woman for a drink, let the woman you have chosen answer, 'Drink, and here is water for your camels as well.'" And soon a beautiful young woman came to the well. As she bent to fill her bucket, the servant ran up to her. "Please, may I have a drink from your pitcher?" he asked her. "Drink," she replied, "and here is water for your camels too." And so the servant thought that this was probably the wife God had chosen for Isaac. And so he gave her a gold ring and 2 gold bracelets as presents. "What is your name?" he asked. "My name is Rebekah," she said, "and my father is Bethuel." The servant knew that Bethuel was related to Abraham, and he thanked God for his help in finding a wife for Isaac. "Is there room in your house to stay the night?" the servant asked. Rebekah smiled. "We have plenty of food and straw for your camels and a place for you to sleep." So at dinner, Abraham's servant explained why he had come to Haran. And when he had finished his story, he asked whether Rebekah would return to Canaan with him to be Isaac's wife. Then Rebekah's brother and father said, "This is the Lord's work. Take Rebekah and go, and let her be the wife of your master's son." So in the morning the servant came to Laban, Rebekah's brother, and said, "If Rebekah is ready, please send me back to my master." But Laban looked doubtful. "Perhaps she should stay here a little while longer," he said. 10 days, maybe, and then she can go. The servant spoke quickly. "This is the Lord's work," he told Laban. "It should be done now. Send me home with Rebekah." And so Laban called Rebekah and asked, "Will you go with this man?" "Yes, I will go," answered Rebekah. And with this, Rebekah's family blessed her and sent her on her way. Abraham's servant led the caravan, followed by Rebekah. And now it happened that as the caravan neared Canaan, Isaac was walking in the fields. He could see the caravan approaching, and Rebekah saw him. Seeing the handsome young man, Rebekah asked, "Who is that?" The servant answered that this was Isaac, who would be her husband. And so Rebekah covered her face, for in those days a young man did not look at the face of his wife before they were married. But soon after, Isaac and Rebekah were married, and Isaac took Rebekah to live in the tent that had belonged to his mother. And Isaac loved Rebekah very much, and was comforted after his mother's death. So, as we heard, Abraham told his best servant to go to the land of Haran, which is Abraham's homeland, and to find a wife for his son Isaac. Abraham didn't just want any wife for Isaac, but he wanted one specifically from his home country. And in case you were curious, the reason that Abraham sent a servant there instead of going himself is that it was a very long journey from Canaan to Haran. We're talking about like having to walk for several days. And Abraham at that point, he was very old and he wasn't strong enough to make the journey on his own. But he sent his top, most trusted servant. The servant knew that he had to go a long way through the hot and dry desert to go back to Abraham's father's home. And he knew that he had to carry back many things with him, presents and gifts, gold, camels, everything like this. Because back in that time, it was expected that if you wanted to get married, you had to bring presents and gifts for the bride-to-be, as well as for her father. So the servant took with him 10 camels that were totally loaded down with gifts, and he set off on his journey. And when the servant finally arrived at the place of Abraham's home country, he and the camels stopped at a nearby well. And it was the time of day when all the young women in the village would come to the well to get some water for their families. And this whole time, the servant was worried about when he got to the well, when he got to the town, how would he know which woman was the right one, the one that God wanted for Isaac? So what he did was he stopped at the well and he prayed. And he asked God to show him a special sign. He said, "God, the woman that you want to be Isaac's bride, please give me a sign so that I'll know it's her." He knew that God cared about who Isaac had for a wife, and it would be impossible finding her on his own. So he asked for the sign. He asked that the girl that God wanted for Isaac would give him a drink of water at the well, and then she would offer water to all of his camels. And of course, because he was faithful in God, he found this woman. A young woman named Rebekah came to the well, and just like God had told the servant, she offered him and his camels some water. So the servant, because he realized that this is the woman God wanted for Isaac, he explained to Rebekah that God had sent him to find her to be a wife for Isaac. And just as Rebekah was a faithful woman, and as Rebekah was a faithful woman also who believed in God and followed his will, she accepted and went back with the servant to be Isaac's wife. And because this was a marriage that was blessed by God, it was a relationship that God had ordained, we say, they lived a very happy and holy life married together. So that's the story of Isaac and Rebekah. As you can see in this story, we have several examples of people who followed God's will. The servant prayed to God and to guide him in finding Isaac's bride, because the servant knew that God takes care of us and guides us when we ask for it. that God knows what is best for his children. He knows alone, God knows alone, who would be the best wife for Isaac. And because Isaac knew that this woman was chosen by God, he married her faithfully, right? He didn't know this woman. He didn't know if they were going to get along. He didn't know if they were going to be work well together. But because God had chosen her for him, he trusted that God knew what was best for him. So we can kind of believe, even though it's not said in the story, that the reason that the servant and that Abraham's servant and Isaac, Abraham's son, were so obedient to God was because they were taught by Abraham himself, right? They grew up in Abraham's house. And that is why God chose Abraham and his people to be God's people. He knew that Abraham would teach his people well. So these characters in the story can be our example. Unlike some of the other stories we have read so far, where all the characters did not follow God's will, and when they didn't, bad things happened. Oftentimes it resulted in their death. Abraham and his son Isaac and his faithful servant, on the other hand, all followed God's will, right? They prayed and to figure out what God wanted for them. And because they were obedient and followed what God wanted for them, they received many blessings, right? Isaac got a wife, Abraham got a daughter-in-law, right? And we're going to read more. They had many children who would continue to be the people of God. All right, guys, I think that's good for this week. We'll continue with the rest of Isaac's story next week.